Imagine a world where hundreds of thousands of people are slaughtered, deported, and erased from history because of their religion and ethnicity. A world where the survivors struggle to preserve their identity and culture in the face of oppression and assimilation. This is not a fictional scenario, but a tragic reality that befell the Assyrian Christians in the Ottoman Empire during World War I. Today, the untold suffering, the forgotten atrocities, and the silenced voices of the Assyrian people will be exposed here. And if you're curious as to why this story has largely escaped the world's attention, the time has come for you to discover the truth. The Assyrians, known for their unique culture and strong religious beliefs, had various churches, such as the Syriac Orthodox, the Church of the East, and the Chaldean Catholic. Before World War I, they lived in far-off and mountainous areas within the Ottoman Empire, some of which didn't have a clear system of governance. And in the mid-19th century, the global community grew increasingly concerned about the difficult situation of Christian minority groups within the Ottoman Empire. They made a series of diplomatic agreements to try and improve their situation. One of the most important ones was the Treaty of Berlin in 1878. It required the Ottoman Sultan to allow Christians to participate in local government in places where they made up a significant part of the population. Unfortunately, this rule wasn't put into practice as it should have been. Foreign consuls, who had the duty of keeping an eye on how people were treated, kept sending reports about the ongoing problems and suffering faced by Christian communities. But as Europeans and Americans tried to help these Christians, a strong negative reaction started to build up. This was especially the case in the more distant and less developed areas of Kurdistan. Even the Ottoman government, which ruled the region, became annoyed with the European concern for the Christian minority. They were worried that it might be a first step towards taking these regions away from their control. In the 1840s, people around the world first learned about the serious danger the Assyrians were in. Kurdish leaders were attacking those who lived in the mountains and worked as farmers. European newspapers had reported around 10,000 people had lost their lives. This led to efforts to collect funds and help those in need. But as the 1890s came around, the situation in the Turkish region got much worse and fell into chaos. Many factors contributed to this turmoil. One big issue was the central government's tightening control, trying to reduce local self-rule, which led to more lawlessness and banditry. Another problem was the growing pressure on nomadic tribes to settle in permanent villages, often by taking land owned by Christians with government support. At the same time, there was widespread distribution of anti-Christian ideas, which even influenced the authorities. Attacks on villages, along with forcing people to convert to Islam, became common. Taking land from non-Muslims was also happening regularly. Even the worst offenders were rarely punished when their victims were not Muslims. One of the most horrifying acts of violence before World War I took place in 1894 to 96 in the city of Diyarbakir. It all started on November 1st, 1895, when someone fired shots near the Grand Mosque, or Ulu Jami, during midday Muslim prayer. This event set off a violent eruption. Muslims began attacking Armenians who were nearby. But soon, the violence turned against all Christians in the city and spread. People began looting, including ordinary folks and government officials. They even set the entire market area on fire, and it quickly got out of control, destroying hundreds of shops and workshops. The smoke and fire could be seen from Ergani, which was 55 kilometers away. Christians who couldn't escape the mob were shot, and the financial losses on the first day were estimated to be about 2 million Turkish pounds. The Diyarbakir massacres lasted for 3 agonizing days, but eventually the governor gave orders to stop the violence. He warned that anyone caught with weapons would face severe punishment. Now, when it comes to the number of lives lost during these horrific events, there are differing accounts. The official report from the Ottoman government in that region stated that 480 Christians had died and 130 Muslims were injured. However, other sources, like Merrier, paint a more devastating picture. They report 1,191 Christian deaths and the abduction of 155 women by Kurdish groups. A grim reality of these times was that many Christians, faced with the horrors unfolding around them, converted to Islam, not out of choice, but out of desperation. It's estimated that around 25,000 Armenians felt compelled to change their religion to Islam during these tragic massacres. The pressures were immense, and survival often came at a high price. In 1913, the persecution of Christians became even more severe, and when World War I began, things got even worse. Iran and Turkey became the stage for rivalries between foreign powers, mainly Russia and Britain. This was when the Armenian Genocide happened. The Ottoman rulers, fearing that their Armenian subjects might support Russia, started a brutal campaign of forced deportation and mass killings, resulting in the deaths of about 1.5 million people. Many Muslims believed that Christians were hoping for their enemies to win. In November 1914, a declaration of jihad was made, urging Muslim soldiers in the British, French, and Russian armed forces to rebel. This declaration unintentionally put the lives of Turkey Christians in danger. Threats, arrests, assaults, and murders of Christians became common. The authorities targeted Christians, with public employees losing their jobs, and Armenian and Assyrian leaders were arrested in large numbers and often tortured into confessing to anti-Turkish plots. The situation worsened as people didn't have enough food and began falling ill. Then, in May and June of 1915, a terrible series of massacres targeted Christians, especially Armenians and Assyrians, simply because they were not Muslims. This violence started with the false claim that Assyrians were refusing to surrender their weapons. It led to ongoing harassment and eventually attacks on villages near Diyarbakir, organized by Rashid Bey, the provincial governor. He mistakenly believed that Armenians and Assyrians were in rebellion, so he created a special militia called Çete, because the regular army was away at the front lines. The villages were surrounded, men were killed, and women and children were scattered. In towns, Assyrians who had Muslim friends were sometimes warned about house searches. Although the Istanbul government had issued deportation orders for Armenians, these orders didn't cover Diyarbakir, which witnessed a general massacre, extending beyond the war zone and affecting various Christian groups. Throughout the summer and fall of 1915, Armenian civilians were forcibly removed from their homes and marched through the valleys and mountains of eastern Anatolia toward desolate concentration camps. This deportation was overseen by both civil and military officials and was accompanied by a systematic campaign of mass murder carried out by irregular forces as well as by local Kurds and Circassians. Those who survived and reached the Syrian deserts suffered in concentration camps. Many died from starvation, and the massacres continued into 1916. Conservative estimates suggest that somewhere between 600,000 to over 1 million Armenians were killed or perished during these forced marches. Some were abducted, some subjected to sexual mistreatments, and some were stripped naked and made to walk under the scorching sun until they fell dead. Among the many thousands of survivors, some were orphaned and endured forced marriages or conversions to Islam, growing up without their Armenian identity. Armenian community assets, such as schools, churches, cultural institutions, businesses, and personal belongings, were either demolished or taken over by the government and redistributed to Turks. Other Christian groups, like the Greeks and Assyrians, faced similar persecution, with hundreds of thousands losing their lives. The large-scale massacres persisted until the final years of the Ottoman Empire, carried out by Turks until the founding of the Republic of Turkey in 1923. The Armenian Genocide is considered the first modern genocide because of its systematic planning and execution. Unfortunately, the perpetrators were not held accountable, and the victims never received restitution. Adolf Hitler took inspiration from this lack of consequences when planning the Holocaust, the genocide of Jews in Europe. In a speech before invading Poland in 1939, Hitler proudly proclaimed his intent to kill mercilessly, noting, "Who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians?" Following the Assyrian Genocide, many Assyrians chose to leave the Middle East in search of safer and more prosperous lives in Western countries. As a result, the Assyrian population in the Middle East has significantly reduced. Sadly, nobody ever faced official charges or arrests for the Assyrian Genocide. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire crumbled and its leaders fled. The only person they managed to catch was Mehmed Rashid, the governor of Diyarbakir, who played a key role in the Assyrian and Armenian genocide. The Allies captured him after the war, but he somehow escaped from prison with the help of some friends. Later, the police tracked him down, but he chose to end his own life by shooting himself in the head before they could capture him. The Assyrians and other Christian minorities never received justice or compensation for their losses and suffering. They were mostly ignored by the international community and the new Turkish Republic that emerged after the war. The Turkish government denied any responsibility or involvement in the genocide and refused to admit it happened. Only a few countries, like Sweden, Armenia, Greece, and Australia, have officially recognized the Assyrian Genocide. The American ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, Henry Morgenthau, expressed in his memoirs that the Turkish authorities understood that when they ordered the deportation, they were essentially signing the death warrant for an entire race. They did not hide this fact in their conversations with him. Despite the challenges, the Assyrian people continue to hope that, one day, they will see justice and accountability for the terrible atrocities they endured. This is Nasty History, and we will see you next time.